Hi,
Hi.
how are
Oh,
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm so happy to meet you.
I'm so happy to meet you as well. And this all works and we're here.
Yes, it says it's recording, so I'm gonna hope that it is.
Yeah, no, those I that seems to be very reliable.
Oh, good,
Yeah, so
good.
I'm sure that it is. And in fact, what you can do or um is you can edit it so like what we're saying now can be cut out.
Right. Yeah, I think that some of the other Janes people are more technically inclined than me.
Yeah, I'm not. I know how to log into Zoom and that's it.
So tell me, are you still at the Vermont at the College of Vermont?
Yeah, Vermont College of
Vermont
Fine
College.
Arts. Yes, I do teach there, but it's low residency. So I'm actually in Michigan right now. So
Awesome.
so we just go there, pre-COVID. We just would go there twice a year for these residencies, and then everybody goes home, and then I work one-on-one with students during the semester.
Great.
But since COVID, we've been doing our residencies this way
This
through
way,
Zoom.
okay. So do
Yeah.
you work with Connie May?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I've been following you we've been Facebook friends for quite some time, and I was trying to trace back how did I become friends with her? And it must be through Connie.
That must be it. Yes. In fact, she's chair of the department right now, but she's like, one of my best friends.
Oh, wow. Look, I've known Connie forever. She was actually the first book review I ever wrote, which was like 30 years ago, was Connie.
That is
So,
fascinating. I had no
yeah,
idea, but yes, that must be, we must have become friends through Connie.
awesome,
Yeah,
awesome.
that really is. That's so funny.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, I loved your book. Obviously,
Thank you.
it's so amazing. But I was looking. I was just doing a little background on you, and I realized, oh my gosh! And I had this as one of the questions that it's not your first memoir, and I can't wait to talk more about that. But
Right.
one of the things that struck us about your book was the structure, which is so different and but so neat. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you came to whether it was a decision to make the structure this way, or if it's something that just kind of poured out of you that way.
It was not decided ahead of time at all. I mean, when I first started writing the book, I should say that I didn't even know I was writing a book. I thought I was just sort of writing essays. And then at some point, it kind of occurred to me, oh, these really are sort of about my fear of death, which has been a lifelong fear, but I'd never really written about it.
Hmm.
And so then I continued writing, but they were still just kind of essays, sort of, floating along, kind of piling one up on top of the next. And I would say maybe 2, 3 years in, I realized that well, the book did need a structure, and so um, just kind of playing with the pieces, I came up with this idea for 3-part structure, and so that they're kind of the parts are sort of loose, and that there's some overlap, but one of the parts is sort of about the origin of my fear of death.
Mhm.
And one is sort of about my more physical fears of death and sort of being a hypochondriac on top of that. And then the third part is sort of kind of the emotional deaths that we kind of experience more universally, like, well, so the title of the book is How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences. So the
Mhm.
other inconveniences are sort of my way I call kind of emotional deaths, things like, you know, illness, divorce, you know, loss of a loved one,
Mhm.
just addiction, things like that. And so then that's one of the parts too. So there are these 3 parts, but then sort of intersecting these parts is this kind of a metaphorical road trip that I, as the narrator, am on. So, which takes place kind of on this Route 17, which is this very industrialized highway in New Jersey that most kind of normal people would really hate, but I happen to really love it. And when I was a teenager, I used to just go cruising on it, So this
Yeah.
is back from when I was a teenager. And it's just a lot of neon and roaring trucks and that sort of New Jersey smell that if you've ever been sort of a New Jersey turnpike. Um, but it became a kind of through thread in that the narrator is sort of on a kind of a memory road trip through her life. So as she's on this road trip, she's kind of collecting memories, and the memories, it's sort of the idea where if you collect your memories, even if you have to physically die, which I'm holding out hope that I don't physically die, but in case I do, I will have been collecting my memories along the way. And so memories do kind of outlive us. So one of the themes of the book is kind of this memory road trip where the narrator is sort of like cruising through her life, just remembering and collecting memories, things that have happened to her that all in some way do revolve around this narrator's fear of death, whether it be physical or just how, in some ways it's also sort of about how to survive life, but also sort of how to survive these more emotional issues that befall all of us, whether it be illness or addiction or,
which are kind of like death. I mean, when they happen.
Absolutely, they do. They feel like death. It's a form of death. And so that became sort of significant as I was writing the book, that it's okay. Yeah, I am scared of physical death, but what about all of these other things that sort of mimic a kind of form of just such deep loss that they do, that it does feel like death.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool to hear. I mean, I started today, because I read it a few months ago. And so today I was reread the first chapter and the last chapter. And now I'm beginning to see, I'm gonna have to reread it again so that I can go on that road trip again with you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, but I want to emphasize though, for, maybe people who are currently working on a book, that I really did not know any of this ahead of time. Yeah. It's really a matter of kind of finding my way into the material.
It's a very different book than another one I read recently, which was Glennon Doyle's Untamed. In that, have you read that?
Not yet, but it's on my list.
Well, it's the same kind of thing in that it was almost like and I got this feeling from your book, my life is not really organized. And so this is going to come out the way I'm living. And I really love that about it. It just seemed it was very real.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the definitions? When did you decide, wow, this would be a cool thing to add?
Yeah. So So if you haven't read the book, each of the chapters or each of the essays has an archaic word. One of them is 13. Okay, this essay is 13 Ways of Surviving New Jersey. And one of these archaic words is venetation. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, which is the act of causing to become beautiful. And but each essay has an archaic word. And this was so serendipitous because at the time that I started writing this book, I totally just happened to land on this website of archaic words. I mean, it just happened. And I was reading these archaic words and I started feeling really sorry for them, that they had gone out of use and nobody used these words anymore. And in a sense, they had died.
Yeah.
So I realized that, that this really is part of it, because of course, as we collect our memories, the memories are written, obviously in language and words. I'm a writer. And so I thought these words have to be part of the book, that as I'm trying to save my own life, I'm also want to sort of save and sort of resurrect these archaic words. They will be part of the culture again.
Oh, that's really neat. I like that. The one in particular, I actually did know the definition of, well, this wasn't one of your definitions, but you used it, limerence.
Yes.
Which I had actually heard. I had heard a story of NPR about limerence, and I had been having these weird, like uncontrollable crushes on men. And it was defined within the family of limerence. And I thought, oh my God, that's a thing. It's not just me.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Cool.
So, yeah. So the words just, they just seem like a good way to sort of introduce. So each of these archaic words in some ways speaks to what that particular essay is about.
Neat. The stories, many of the stories, because you were talking about them being when you were a teenager, they span several decades. And I think you've answered this, but I wondered if you had written any of them in the past, or if you had to kind of revisit that time and write them from the future, from now.
From now. Yeah, no, I did not write any of them in the past. I mean, so the book was published March 2020. So let's say I started it about maybe 5 or 6 years before then. So the book is, fairly recent. But yes, the book spans everywhere from about second grade or so to pretty much the present. But the book was all written within this 5 or 6 year span. And so it's very much based on memory, which again is sort of what the book is about, is memory.
Mm-hmm.
And but I guess I want to sort of emphasize that even though a lot of the things happened a long time ago, that to me, memory is truth. And memoir itself is not a search for a fact, but it is a search for truth. And all my memories do represent a truth about, my experience. And of course, memories evolve over time. And
Mm-hmm.
so the book also reflects that idea that, say something that happened to me, let's say in second grade or something. When I'm in 10th grade, I'll have one memory of it. But now, say writing about it, the memory, sort of shifts. All of our memory sort of shifts, kind of depending upon what happens to us. We sort of see things differently. But I think that's a really important part of memoir, is this idea of memory and how memories shift, but which isn't to say that they're not true, because they are all true. But memoir is not supposed to be like a factual document you could say use in a court of law or something like that.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It is a really important. When I was writing my own memoir, I remember one of my sisters saying, "That did not happen to you," and I was like, "No, not that."
Exactly. If my
Yeah.
sister were to write a memoir about our growing up, it would be totally different from mine. I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah, that's just what memory is how we interpret things that happen to us.
Yeah. Are there any tricks that you use to help spark your memory, or smells, or revisiting places that help you?
Yes, absolutely. For me, my body actually remembers more than maybe my brain does. So
Mm,
I write from a very sensory place, all of the senses, sight, smell, taste, hearing, all of the senses. So when I start a scene or an essay, I kind of let myself sort of drop into this not totally meditative state, but close to it, where I really embed myself in this world of the senses.
mm,
And it is amazing to me how much my sensory body remembers.
mm,
And then once the senses are kind of brought back, then the body sort of prompts that conscious response so that it turns into language. But
mhm,
it all but initially it really all sort of comes from my body. And
mm.
like, how did that moment smell like? Oh, it smelled like this. And then that will trigger another sensory memory. And then that will trigger sort of thoughts and things that I believe happen. So it's sort of this process, but it all does begin in my body, and I've always been a very sensory person, which I'm glad for. And I think it really has kind of helped me as a writer.
It must have been. I mean, you write about some very viscerally physical things, though. The process must have been at times very painful.
It's interesting because it's two things. It's painful, but it's also empowering.
Mm,
In that once I write, yes, a lot, I do write about some painful, sort of dark things. And when I'm in the moment, it can be sort of scary. But ultimately, I feel a big sense of relief
mm,
that I've gotten it sort of whatever the event is, well, I write about a sexual assault, for example. And once I've written about that sexual assault, it's like I can take it out of my body and sort
mm,
of put it over here in words, sort of on a piece of paper.
yeah.
Plus by my being able to write about it, then I can make sense of it. I can understand it in a way that I can't. If I'm just sort of thinking about something, I'm not really making sense of something. It's just sort of idle thoughts. And um, I really hardly know what I think until I write. And so by writing about it, it gives it an organization. It's like I have control over it now. I did not have control when the sexual assault happened, but I do now through language and through writing about it on the page. I organize it, I make sense of it. Then ultimately it's really empowering. And by believing that, in a way, that gives me sort of the courage to continue writing, because I know that once I've written through it, that I'm going to be a lot stronger and, as I say, sort of more empowered.
That's a great lead into my next question, which is about the genre of memoir. I mean, I think that people don't understand how writers can continually write about themselves and things that have happened. I mean, how much could have happened to you in your life? And then you start to realize, well, gosh, I have so much to work through. I'm 57 years old and I'm not done with my problems, you know?
Right, exactly.
Could you talk about the importance of that? I mean, this is your fourth or your fourth memoir?
Yes, I have a craft book, Fearless Confessions, but then my first book is Because I Remember Terror, Father, I Remember You, which is about growing up in my incestuous family. The second book is Lovesick, which is about 28 days I spent in rehab for a sex addiction. And then my third book is The Pat Boone Fan Club, My Life as a White Anglo-Saxon Jew, which is sort of an ironic book. But it is sort of about my misguided search for spirituality growing up. It's sort of like, because my Jewish father sexually molested me, I kind of wanted to be Christian. And so it sort of explores that. And then this fourth book is about my fear of death. And, but writing memoir, I mean, we're writing about ourselves, but if we're writing a literary memoir, we're writing metaphorically, which also means that we are writing about the human condition. And that's why memoir is so important. And I think that's why people read memoirs, why it's a very popular genre, because as much as I'm speaking or writing about myself, it's not just me. I mean, it is, even if the exact same thing didn't happen to you, the emotions are what makes it real or true for everybody. For example, like in Lovesick, about recovering from sex addiction, I got lots of letters from women who also were struggling with sex addiction, but I got a lot of response from women who did not struggle with sex addiction, but still had that sense of sort of abandonment or fear, kind of a search for identity and our sexual selves. So it's about more than just my journey through sexual addiction. These books really do speak to the human condition. And I think to write them, I mean, as I said before, it is very empowering. And I think that particularly, I think that this wave of memoir that really sort of started in about 1995, let's say the mid 1990s. A lot of it was propelled by women and people who have been marginalized, whether that's BIPOC or LGBTQ. I mean, whatever it is, the voices that have been marginalized are the voices that are really driving the memoir movement. And it's because we're the ones who have been silenced for so long. I mean, men's voices were always out there, and so, but women sort of claimed their own voices, their own lives as being very significant. Like my story is as important, say, as some man's memoirs say he wrote about World War II or fighting in Vietnam, the sort of the war stories. So women or marginalized voices, we can write our own quote war stories,
Right.
wars that maybe happened in our homes, like say my father sexually molesting me.
Well, sure. Yeah.
So so I think that that's the importance of both writing memoir and even reading it.
Mm,
Whenever I read a memoir, it's just like I now will understand someone's situation in a much deeper way. And
mm,
so it's kind of this sort of chorus of voices in a way that really can sort of bring us all together. I
mm.
mean, I see memoir as a kind of unifying force within culture. And at the end of the day, what survives sort of wars and everything else, what survives is the personal narrative,
Right.
our personal stories. I mean, it's people have been telling stories since before we could write,
Yeah.
and stories and our narratives are just so crucial.
And I love the way you the how they're indicative of the human condition. I love that phraseology. It's interesting. I teach journalism at the University of North Florida, and I was talking to my classes yesterday about books and what gets on the bestseller list. And so we pulled up the bestseller list, and I see that Matthew McConaughey has a memoir out, and I'm like, oh, for God's sakes! And nothing against Matthew McConaughey, he's beautiful to look at, but it's like, okay, but that's not about the human condition. That's about
So
Matthew McConaughey. It's different.
yes,
It's very
yes,
different.
yes. I definitely want to separate celebrity memoirs, which from real people memoirs. A
Yeah.
celebrity memoir, for the most part, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, it's more sort of autobiography and it's making me look really good, like I'm, this great person. Whereas our ordinary memoirs written by ordinary people, we're not trying to make ourselves look good. It's about self-exploration. I write to try to understand my life and
Hmm.
all these different aspects of my life. As you say, each book covers a different topic. And so I write not from a place of revenge or anything like that. I
Right.
really write to understand uh, myself. I mean, it is all absolutely about self-exploration. And the
Hmm.
celebrity memoirs, they really, for the
They're
most
really not.
part, are not. No, no. It's sort of frustrating, but whatever.
Yeah, it's frustrating for the writers who haven't yet quite been discovered.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because but I just see us, and being discovered or not, still it's important to get your voice out there. I mean,
Mm,
just to tell your story. I mean, that's what's just, if you don't tell your story, nobody else will.
nobody else will.
And then it's lost forever.
Yeah.
So if anybody, whoever is listening to this, just know that your voice is important.
Yeah.
And if you don't write it, nobody else will. So just believe in yourself, believe that your story means something, because it does.
I
It
love that, Sue. I mean, I feel like sometimes I have to preach this to kids sometimes who are writing, that we've got to redefine success. Being a successful writer doesn't mean that you make a lot of money. Being a successful writer actually just means kind of that you write. Um,
Totally, absolutely, just right,
yeah.
just right. And chances are, if you say it long enough, you'll get it published. But the important thing is just to not even worry about that at the beginning. The first step and the most important step is just to write, to get your story down on paper. Right, you'll feel empowered. You'll understand yourself better, and then after the story is down, then you can sort of worry about publishing and stuff like that. But writing really has saved my life.
Mm.
And I don't want that to sound too melodramatic, like not necessarily
Oh, not
physical,
at all.
but
What you
emotional
need it to
life.
do to understand yourself.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So one of the reasons that we chose you for our award winner is
Thank you.
because, well, it was deserved, of course,
Thank you.
but because we look for women who are unflinchingly brave, and who are breaking boundaries in some way. And so I can tell you're not the type of person who wants to talk about how brave she is and how she breaks boundaries. But if you could tell me a little bit about the courage, because it does take courage to do what you do, and how you do try to do it in a way that if not breaks boundaries, is pushing against the norm.
Yeah. And let me take that second part first about pushing against the norm. I think that with every book I write, I don't want to be repeating myself. I want to explore both new material and new ways to present the material. So my first two books were pretty straight through narrative memoirs. And then I tried to sort of write in essay collections and then try to figure out, well, how do these all tie together? And with How to Survive Death and Other Inconveniences, the hard part is that you're sort of writing about something you know nothing about, because I thank goodness I haven't died yet. I'm still here. But so death is sort of abstract. And how could I make death tangible and something that I really could look at and say, okay, this really is what I'm scared of? And so I think that it's just sort of pushing the boundaries of what creative nonfiction is, and making it so it's not just one thing or there's just one way to write it. Just there's so many different ways to approach it. And the trick is that each book you write has to find its own form, its own structure, its own language, its own voice. My books are pretty much written sort of in different sounding voices to some extent, because each does have to all has to mesh together, structure, voice, metaphor. It has to be a cohesive whole. Even in an essay collection, there still needs to be sort of something that's a course holding it all together. So if the book is groundbreaking, and thank you so much for thinking so, I think it sort of grows out of that need to explore the self in lots of different ways. In terms of the courage, yeah, that's sort of hard to say. Yeah, I'm a courageous person. I mean, but I think that I reached a place when I wrote my first book where it was harder not to tell the story. I was so bottled up. It was sort of like I was so full of words that I just felt like they just had to come out. And so it was from this need to oh gosh, I have to write. I've got to figure this out. I have to get it down. So initially, I can't really say it felt like courage to write. It was more like this really deep-seated need. Like, I have got to understand what this thing happened to me, whether it was, the sex addiction or growing up in an incestuous family, or my desire to sort of be Christian growing up, or fear of death, whatever it is. It just builds up in me until if I don't write, I'll feel like I'll sort of explode. So, but thank you so much for choosing my book. And it means so much to me that you do think that about me and my writing.
I certainly do. And maybe in terms of bravery, a way that you might think about it is that it's a compulsion to tell the truth.
Yes.
Which is a compulsion I also have. And sometimes when you tell the truth, people around you are like, did you really want to tell people that? And your answer is, yeah,
I really do. Yeah, no, absolutely. A need to tell the truth is so important. I see writers of memoir as truth tellers. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what we do. We tell our truth. And by telling our truth, we do tell the truth of others, as I was saying, about the human condition. But yeah, we're absolutely truth tellers. And my job as a writer is not to make people feel comfortable or, I don't know, just sort of okay with the status quo. The role of an artist, and not just writers, but the role of an artist is really to shake up the status quo.
Yeah.
It's to supposed to say, no, this is what I see. And I think that you maybe need to see this too. And here I'm going to share this with you. So read it.
I love that.
Because we are truth tellers. And, before, when women really didn't have our voice, there was just this big hole in our culture, a vacuum, where there was we weren't speaking our truth, about domestic violence, child abuse, our addictions and stuff like that. Women were sort of brought up to sort of be quiet and keep secrets. And so we're breaking secrets, we're telling secrets and speaking our truths.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how long it took for society at large to be willing to hear us.
Oh, absolutely. It took, and it's still a struggle at times.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I actually believe that this wave of memoir, which, as I say, has been really initiated by people who had been marginalized, I think that helped, and that sort of a hashtag Me Too movement. I think that in some ways it's all of a piece, that we started writing our stories, our truths were being told, and we were being heard. I mean, some people dismissed it. Some people said, oh, that's not really literature and go away and you don't know what you're talking about. But enough of us wrote that we couldn't be ignored. And so, it's sort of like I told all these truths and the world continued to turn. How about that? I mean, it's just like I didn't die from telling it. I mean, nothing bad happened. In fact, just the opposite, a lot of positive things. So then that gives courage to more women to like, okay, we are a force to be reckoned with. There are a lot of us.
Yeah.
And then the hashtag Me Too movement sort of evolved from, I think, all of these memoirs that we've been writing.
Yeah, I think so too. And at this point, you would think that we would see the end in sight. But then you have things like what's happening in Texas, and in many other. I live in Florida, truly the root of all evil. And yeah, and you think, no, I mean, I think sometimes we're going backwards.
It feels that way. I mean, it really feels that we starting with 2016, we won't mention what happened in 2016, but somebody got elected president who will remain nameless.
He will not be named.
Voldemort. Right. I mean, I think we really did go backwards and certainly lost some ground. And it's so interesting because during that time, and then with the pandemic, a lot of writers I know thought, well, my voice isn't important. We've got this pandemic and all of these terrible things are happening, but this is the time to really tell your story. It's just the opposite. I mean, you don't have to write about the pandemic, whatever your story is, when we're in a crisis, that's when we really need to kind of tell our stories, be a force to be reckoned with. Wait, you're muted.
I muted myself because my dogs were barking. I have one last question for you, which is to tell me who are the women that you most admire that are writing today, or perhaps you have somebody who's a go-to writer who is no longer with us, who you find continually as inspirational.
Yeah, both. So the memoir I just finished reading is called Black is the Body. It's by Emily Bernard, and it's really just a beautiful memoir. So Emily Bernard, Black is the Body. Another just amazing contemporary memoirist is Kelly Groom, who wrote, this is sort of a long title, it's a beautiful title, I Wore the Ocean in the Shape of a Girl.
Oh,
isn't that beautiful?
Love that.
So Kelly Groom is the author of that, I Wore the Ocean in the Shape of a Girl. Some of my early influences were not memoirists, because when I started writing I actually started as a fiction writer, but I'm a terrible fiction writer. I didn't publish any of those not bad novels. But that was sort of before anybody was writing memoirs. So there are two women, Jean Rhys, R-H-Y-S, who wrote White Sargasso Sea, which is sort of an autobiographical novel in many ways. And then Marguerite Duras, who wrote The Lover, which is also an autobiographical novel. So, I mean, they're called fiction, but it's as close to sort of memoirs you can get. And both of these women had an enormous, enormous impact on me as a person and as a writer. It's just those books really just sort of revolutionized, I mean, my sort of way I saw language and narrative. And then there's a poet, Linda Hull, Lynda, Hull, Hull, whose poetry just totally resonates with me. So those were some of my earliest influences, I would say. And just if people are interested, so on my website, I have this humongous list of creative nonfiction.
Wow.
If you, my website is SueWilliamSilverman.com. And if you scroll down the right-hand side, you'll see Sue's contemporary CNF reading list. And it's like 9 pages long. I mean, it's on the web. So, but I think if I printed it out, it'd probably be about 9 pages. So that's a lot of people use that what teachers use that as sort of a source, but also you can just, I mean, I do have to admit, I haven't read all those books, but they've been recommended to me and right. Yeah. But, just you can, and it's arranged sort of by category.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to pick up your book about the craft. I'm just finishing up Mary Carr's book, The Art of Memoir, which is also, she also has a long list that I am probably never going to get through, but it makes me want to read yours as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I thank you so much, Sue. This has just been lovely.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, it just, you're selecting my book. I mean, it really just, I was like so stunned. I mean, I was just so grateful, to be heard like that. I mean, it just, I just felt light and happy and just, in the middle of a lot of darkness going on now. It just was so, so deeply meaningful to me to be, yes, the award in itself, but also to come from like a women's organization, just meant it was just that much more meaningful to me. So I'm just so grateful to you and your organization. Just thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome, and it was well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's just been great talking to you.
You too.